This is PIC Computing, A-Level Computing video 89, looking at the features of operating systems. Now, when we talk about operating systems, what we might currently recognize are some of these things. We might recognize an operating system as being somewhere where we can click on things to change settings and add programs or change how hardware works using something like a control panel. We might recognize it as being a place where we go to load up all of our programs. We might recognize it as being somewhere where we can go and view and manage all of our files. All these last three screenshots are screenshots from Microsoft Windows. This last one actually from one of the first versions of Microsoft Windows, Windows 3.11. And Microsoft Windows might be recognized as the first operating system we think about because it is by far the most used operating system across the world. There's a screenshot of Windows 8, for example. We might also recognize operating systems like the Apple Mac operating system, OS X. We might have heard of, or maybe even used, something called Linux. Linux is generally a free operating system, so is therefore very popular, and comes in different what we call flavors, such as Ubuntu. And there's a screenshot of Ubuntu there, and that version of Ubuntu has got a nice name, which is Hardy Heron. We also might recognize operating systems on mobile devices. So there's the Android operating system, or the iOS operating system for iPhones. Servers, big powerful computers. That's the server there, by the way, the computer in the background, not that man in the foreground. Servers need operating systems such as Windows Server, which are more powerful and will do more things than a standard desktop version of Windows, like a standard desktop operating system. And other powerful computers such as the IBM AS400 will have an operating system, albeit one that looks like a very old and dated user interface. Now, all of these things we've just been through, although very interesting, you won't need to know for the exam. You won't get asked on any brands or latest trends in operating systems for the exam. What you will need to know for the exam are the general features of all of those operating systems. What are the sort of things you will find in all of those? Now, a quick list of them now, and then we'll look at them all in more detail in a moment. The features of an operating system: hardware management, a user interface, an applications interface, security, and utilities. So firstly, hardware management. For example, management of memory resources, including the data and jobs passing through memory. So an operating system will manage what goes in and out of RAM. What other hardware management jobs can you think that an operating system will do? If we wanted to show this diagrammatically, then it might look something a bit like this. The operating system manages the hardware. Next, the user interface. Now, whether it's a nice flashy GUI with things that we can click on or even touch nowadays to make things work, or if it's an older command line style interface, all computers and all operating systems need to provide an interface between the human user and the machine. Otherwise, how would a human use the computer? It would just be useless. By the way, we've had a look at two definitions so far. If some of these things aren't making sense, you'll do well just to try to memorize and remember the definitions for the exam. Even if you don't understand them, you can still learn them and memorize them and get the marks. So if we were going to show how that bit is shown diagrammatically, we've got the operating system that manages the hardware, and then human users can use the operating system to use the hardware, to make use of the hardware. So that's where that might fit into a diagram. Next, applications interface. This is used to provide an interface between applications and hardware so they can communicate with each other. So applications can do something useful with the hardware, for example, printing. So a program like Microsoft Word can print because of the applications interface. So human users use the operating system, and therefore the hardware. So how does applications interface fit into the diagram? Well, we know now that the operating system provides a link between application software and the hardware. But also, just to complete this part of the diagram, I think we need another arrow there to show that human users also use applications as well as the operating system. Thinking about security. The operating system needs to provide data security, especially when there could be multiple users of an OS, which would certainly happen on a network. There's obviously multiple users on a network, but even on desktop versions of things like Windows, we can have multiple users these days. Finally, utilities. The operating system needs to provide utility software so that it can be maintained. So how would this fit into a diagram? I think somewhere in there. Human users use utility software to be able to maintain and keep the operating system working well. So if we were to click in the Systems Tools program menu in Windows, we'd find lots of the utilities. This isn't all the utilities you could have on a computer. You can install more afterwards. But an example would be the disk defragmenter, which will help organize files on your disk and tidy up how files are stored on your disk. And another thing that we should think about for a future lesson is something called a task scheduler, the way that things can be set up to run automatically on your computer. So I hope you can memorize those definitions, even if you can't try to understand how some of those things work. And I hope that's useful for you in preparation for your exam.